NAMI, or the National Alliance on Mental Illness, is the nation's largest grassroots mental health organization dedicated to building better lives for the millions of Americans affected by mental illness. Today, NAMI represents an alliance of 49 state organizations and over 600 local affiliate chapters. As one of NAMI's state organizations, NAMI Tennessee is dedicated to enhancing the lives of Tennesseans affected by mental illness. Today, I want to welcome you to the first webinar of our 2022 series for Bebe Campbell Minority Mental Health Awareness Month, which we host every July to support access to equitable mental health treatment, services, and support for racial, ethnic, and sexual minority populations, including BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and LGBTQ+, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, and queer questioning here in Tennessee. But before we go on, who was Bebe Campbell? Bebe Campbell was an American author, journalist, teacher, and mental health advocate who worked to shed light on the mental health needs of the Black community and other underrepresented communities. She was a co-founder of NAMI Urban Los Angeles, which created a space that was safe for Black people to talk about mental health concerns. On June 2nd, 2008, Congress formally recognized Bebe Campbell National Minority Mental Health Awareness Month to bring awareness to the unique struggles that underrepresented groups face regarding mental illness in the United States. But without further ado, let me introduce today's speaker. For today's webinar, we are joined by Bruce Huffman, Regional Manager at the Tennessee Mental Health Consumers Association. Today, Bruce will share his mental health recovery story as a Southern man navigating stigma around gender identity and the pressures and expectations of toxic masculinity. Bruce will also talk about his experience as a certified peer recovery specialist, or CPRS, because we're all about acronyms here in the mental health world, working to support LGBTQ mental health in Tennessee. And finally, I want to help set the table for our presentation today. First, this webinar is being recorded and simultaneously streamed to those who registered here on Zoom, as well as individuals joining us via Facebook live stream. Second, if at any point you have a question for Bruce, please type it into the Q&A or comment box on the platform you're watching from. We will address questions asked on Zoom first, followed by any comments from the Facebook live stream. We will leave time at the end of Bruce's presentation to address as many audience questions as we can. And with all of that stuff out of the way, I'm going to pass it off to Bruce to formally introduce himself and today's presentation. So Bruce, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Kyle. Good afternoon, everybody. As Kyle mentioned, my name is Bruce Huffman. I'm a regional manager with Tennessee Mental Health Consumers Association. I am a certified peer recovery specialist, or CPRS, and I'm a peer in recovery. Today, I'm going to be sharing a little bit about some of my personal history, my recovery journey, kind of what got me here. So what it was like, what happened, and what it's like now. I'm going to discuss a little bit about our agency, Tennessee Mental Health Consumers Association, and also talk a little bit about my work with the LGBTQ plus community in mental health recovery. I just want to say a huge thank you to Kyle for all of this organization. Your communication has just been super fantastic, and I feel very comfortable, and I knew exactly what was expected of me. So thank you very much. And then also just to Ms. Marta Hernandez for making the connection. Truly, I really truly believe that in recovery, we are so strong together. And this is just such a wonderful opportunity I'm extremely grateful for. So I will talk a little bit about who I am, where I came from. I grew up in a small town in North Mississippi, just on the border of Tennessee and Mississippi. So most of the time I say I'm from Memphis, especially if I'm speaking to a group that might not know, South Haven in Mississippi. Memphis is the nearest metropolitan city, and I really truly identify as a Tennessean. When I was growing up, my home life around, really from the time I was born until about 3 years old, it was pretty chaotic in the sense that, one, my parents were extremely young parents, and they also really married out of a formality because I was going to be born, and that was the standard that was held for them and the values that they upheld as they were growing up, and they wanted to make sure to follow through with that. But in truth, there was a lot of turmoil, a lot of verbal violence, a lot of physical violence from my birth father and towards myself and my mother. And I vaguely remember some of those moments. Fortunately, that was so early on in my life that I didn't carry a whole lot of that with me later. My mom remarried when I was around 3 years old to the man that I now call my dad, and I've called him my dad for 30 years. But when my mom remarried, they still, my mom and my stepdad, they still had a lot of disagreements. Again, young, just trying to do the best that they could do. The biggest difference was there was no physical altercation in my house at that time, which really wasn't something I was totally adjusted to. It was pretty obvious from the time I was around 3 or 4 years old that I was most assuredly not your typical expected Southern masculine child. I was mostly raised by women, and I am eternally grateful for that opportunity. I did carry softer qualities than what might be expected of a man or a male at that time. Instead of playing with dolls, I was supposed to, work on cars, and instead of singing in the living room, I was supposed to be throwing a football. That was the standard of gender that was really applied to me from a very early age. I actually was a gymnast when I was younger, and I think that's one of the first times I really remember ever feeling just totally liberated. I could, fly through the air and do tricks and tumbles, and there was nothing holding me back. It was just me and gravity, and I was probably 6 or 7 years old at that time. But I do remember just feeling the wind on my face and how exciting that was. From my stepfather, who I again call my dad now, that really wasn't something that he wanted, and he made that very clear. It was very difficult for him, and I do want to make it clear we have such a great relationship today, and I will get to that. But at the time, it was very hard for him to see me as a gymnast, a dancer, someone who did braid hair and played with dolls. He wanted, and he made that very clear when I was younger, he wanted someone who was gonna throw a football and work on cars. It sent him a little over the edge, and we definitely had some trials and some tribulations as I got older. Into my teenage years, we certainly disagreed a lot. We agreed to disagree so much to a point that at the age of 16, I had a choice that I was able to make, and it was either stay at home and be a certain way, or you can't live here. And I certainly had a grasp on who I was, and I knew that I could not change that. And so I did make that choice. I moved out at a very early age. When I was 8, however, my mother introduced me to the idea of auditioning for a musical at a local theater. The musical was Peter Pan. I loved the story. I grew up on Disney. I was spoon-fed those stories, and again, it was a form of escapism for me at a very early age. And so I enthusiastically said yes at the opportunity to go and audition. It went incredibly well. I was cast in the show. I have made a lifelong career out of theater ever since, and for most of my youth into my teenage years, theater was a real sanctuary for me. I was able to kind of escape that home life, that chaos, or that lack of acceptance that I maybe felt at that time, and really slip into someone else's skin as that character. And just like as being a gymnast flying through the air, I was very liberated as an actor. because of course there was still the fighting and the discourse in our house, and that didn't exist. And for me, trying to identify who I was as a young person, theater allowed me to be anybody and everybody all at the same time, which in so many ways was such a beautiful thing, because I got to explore and experiment and dive into different parts of myself to where I truly was able to find who Bruce is. Um, and it was the biggest help, because I felt like I was not a burden on my family at that time. And I also felt like I could express who I wanted to be and who I knew deep down that I was. And I loved it. And I'm so grateful that I've had the opportunity to perform. Things started to take a little bit of a turn for me when I was 19. I was introduced to alcohol and to other substances. Then I had, of course, been sort of made aware of the dangers of substances at that time, but curiosity naturally got the better of me, and I really knew from there. I was like, oh, well, that was not me. That was someone else in my family, and I'm never going to be like that person. I never want to be like them. So right here in this moment at 19 years old, I'm going to prove that to everyone. And I certainly remember the first time that I ever had a drink. It burned really badly, and it tasted horrible. And eventually, once it sort of settled into my stomach, I felt this deep breath, this soothness about me. From the time I was born up until the age of 19, in that moment, I thought being afraid and being nervous that was normal, that was happy, because that's exactly how I felt every day, all day up to that point. I didn't understand that my emotions were wired at that point to default to fear and worry. And I realized it in that moment when I had that drink. And I took a deep breath, and I suddenly had all this clarity I felt at that time. And that really became the next 10 years of my life. It was a magic elixir. I didn't have any feelings of worry or abandonment or fear. I felt accepted not only by my theater family, but I accepted myself in a strange way all at one time in that moment. I don't know that I'll ever forget exactly what that felt like. However, for me, from that point on, for the next 10 years, it was pretty much off to the races. Alcohol being that elixir, it became my best friend, my master. I would do anything and everything for that to continue finding that respite, that relief, that freshness of, I can breathe again. And unfortunately for me, it really wasn't. I say unfortunately and fortunately for me, that was not the case. Throughout that 10 years, I moved multiple times, and that included actually a 3-year stint in New York City. I went there to chase a dream of being a performer, and I learned so much there. It is such an incredible city, and I truly never thought that I would be there. I guised my leaving as a way to chase a dream, and in many ways I was, but mostly I was running away from the turmoil and chaos and tornadic matter that I had left behind through the damages of living in strong addiction. I was a hurricane through everybody that I met before New York City and in New York, and even a little bit after. In a lot of ways, New York is such a wonderful, magical place. I've made lifelong friends that I still talk to this day. I was first introduced to the idea of helping people when I performed for an event that a foundation called Broadway Cares Equity Fights AIDS hosts every year. It's a big event. I had seen it the year before. I was mesmerized. It was all of this dancing. It was done in a very elevated situation. It was 200 dancers and 4,000 people. And that show was performed twice in a night. And I was just in complete awe of these performers having this opportunity while simultaneously really helping people. I raised $12,000 for that event. It was my first time, and I wasn't sure how I was gonna help people, but I knew in that moment that I was built to help people, and I feel very grateful for that opportunity because, you know, even though I still had a long road ahead to get to my recovery point, to get to my stabilized point, that really played a huge role. And for many years after that, the roots were growing. My recovery roots were growing. At that same event that I performed in, I indulged, I blacked out. I was doing a tumbling stunt because at that time I was still doing some gymnastics, but because I was not necessarily well in that moment or on that day, I didn't have a sense of my physicality. I was kind of dead weight when I went up in the air to flip, and instead of making a full rotation, I made more of like a 1 1/4. I overcompensated because I knew something wasn't totally right, and so I overdid it. And that quarter, that additional quarter that I turned, I landed flat on my face. It was very painful. I fractured my ribs, and I had, a bruised lip. I think the thing that hurt the most in that moment was the fact that there were 4,000 people in that audience that I can't guarantee that all 4,000 people saw that, but it certainly felt like 400,000 people were looking at me in that moment because I had to peel myself up, continue through, and go on. And that stung. And it wasn't so much the physical pain, it was definitely my ego was bruised. I had finally started, I had made a beginning to of coming to terms with the fact that I really had a real problem. And keep in mind, there were so many people here in Memphis that warned me about that before I moved to New York. They said, I don't think you're ready. You shouldn't, you shouldn't do that. It's going to be dangerous. And again, I was there to prove them wrong. And it was in that moment, even though I was blacked out, it was a very sobering moment for me. And all of those memories of those conversations that I had with people who at the time, well, prior to the fall, I thought were really just jealous of me for going. And what I learned in that moment that has stuck with me to this day is they were looking out for me, and they truly were coming from a place of love, because things were really bad before I left and got progressively worse when I was in New York. So after that event, with fractured ribs, there's not really anything that can be done about that. It's it's kind of just a waiting game, and it is extremely painful. I certainly learned to be grateful for the fact that I do have a rib cage and for all of the functions that it helps, like breathing, standing up, and walking. At the time I lived in Manhattan, I lived at a 5-floor walk-up apartment in Hamilton Heights, and to walk up 5 flights of stairs would sometimes take me 2 hours on those days. I couldn't work. My roommate would physically have to pull me out of bed every day because I could not get myself up. It was that painful. And this opportunity came up here in Memphis for me to choreograph a show, and I knew that I needed to come back, but I still wasn't quite ready to admit the fact that it was because I knew that I had a problem and I needed to adjust some things. Because at that point, I wasn't working, I wasn't able to pay my rent. I had successfully, again, that whole hurricane thing, I had successfully ruined and destroyed every ounce of a relationship that I had. I was really, at that time, I felt like I was left with myself. And I was very embarrassed. I was very ashamed. So ultimately, the shame and the guilt and the embarrassment, that's what got me to come back to Memphis. I did uphold the choreography gig, which I felt like was a good thing. I came to Memphis with the intention of choreographing a show and staying for 3 months. That was in 2016, and I have not been back to New York City since. And of course, that was never what I had hoped for to happen, but due to the nature of I moved back from New York, I felt like I was a failure. All of my thoughts and actions and feelings were driven by my ego entirely, and I hit this very dark place of depression. This is when I started to sort of recognize my mental health and how it played a huge role in possibly the substance use disorder. And I stayed, and I kept going from 2016 to 2018 were absolutely the most harried, dark, difficult days. I was living with a friend of mine who was kind enough to let me stay in his home. I destroyed his home. I just, again, that whole hurricane thing, it turned into a tsunami and it got bigger and bigger and bigger. And I knew I needed to stop, but I couldn't. And it's a hard thing to explain to people who maybe haven't experienced substance use disorder, because on the outside, it's sort of like, well, why don't you just stop? And the truth is, I have absolutely zero control over it. Fortunately, we're starting to talk about these things a lot more, and not only in our community, but also the public outside of mental health is really starting to develop an understanding and speak more openly about mental health. And I am incredibly grateful for that, because even though there is stigma, and I feel like we as a community will be fighting that for forever, and I'm kind of glad that we can and we get the opportunity to, because it makes us stronger. I will say that from my experience in the public, it is easing up a little bit. It's not so much coming from a place of gossip as it is maybe a place of concern, and that could have maybe always been, but because I'm starting to change a little bit as a person, I'm starting to see it that way maybe. However, when things got the darkest, I got into my car. I was driving a 2003 Mazda Tribute at the time, which they don't even make those cars anymore. The passenger window had been busted out from, I had fallen asleep behind the wheel. I fortunately did not do damage to the car, to myself, or to the property. It was apparently a very slow, easy thing that happened. I just sort of fell asleep. I parked the car and fell asleep. But because the doors were locked, the EMTs had to pull me out through the passenger window. And of course, I don't remember any of that. So the passenger window was out, and I had no gas in my car because all of my money was spent on, things I felt were at this point not a want, but a need, something I had to have to get me through the day. And so I got in that car. I drove it down Elvis Presley Boulevard here in Memphis. I called my mom. I was weeping. I drove to my grandmother's, that very house that I grew up in. And I looked at her and I told her everything. And these are things I never thought that I would admit to anyone out loud. And certainly did not think that I would be saying it to the woman who raised me and taught me to have values and morals. And there's something about the look on her face that I'll never forget. It was a combination of disappointment and fear and unconditional love all at the same time. It was truly this rush of emotions. And I knew in that moment that there was no way I could ever disappoint somebody, especially not her, like that ever again. And I never wanted to hurt anybody, and I certainly never wanted to hurt her badly ever again. So I started my recovery journey. I started to get a little bit more serious about it. I had heard about some 12-step recovery, and again, I sort of felt like it was bogus and kind of nonsense. And I felt like, in a lot of ways, because I allowed some feelings that my peers at the time had about 12-step recovery influence how I felt about it. And so I didn't go to the 12-step meetings. I did what's called white knuckling it, and I just tried to push through. My uncle at the time was building a house. It was honest, hard work. It was very humbling work. So I helped him build a house, which is something I had never done. And it was very representational of where I was at in my recovery, because we were truly laying a literal foundation. And I was also trying to establish that in my own well-being. We built the house, and about 9 months into that, not working a program of recovery, not really talking to anyone except for my uncle and my grandmother, because those were the people I saw around me. I started to feel like I was maybe reaching a point where I was going to pick up again. And so I knew that I needed to go to a meeting. And I went to a 12-step recovery meeting. I got a sponsor. I didn't really think about it. In all honesty, I knew it needed to happen. I had heard about it. I had friends that had gone through the program, and I had seen their lives just change right in front of me. I knew that that was what I wanted. And I was finally at a place of submission where I was ready to take it on. This person willingly walked me every day, every single day, through a program of recovery, and I was supposed to call him every day and simply just tell him how my day was, check in, and get some reading from him, or he would give me some sort of homework to work on. And it certainly was not something that I wanted to do every single day, but I was desperate, because I could not, and I knew I could not see that look on my grandmother's face again. And that's really what it took for me to get to the point of recovery. That was the motivation that I had at the time. It wasn't so much about me just simply living, as it was, I cannot let that woman down. You know, she raised me, and she took me in and she's treated me like a human being when I certainly did not treat her like one. And some days in my recovery in the beginning were good, and some days were not so great, but I made sure to persevere. And there was certainly not a bad day that was as bad as any of the days 2018 or prior, when I would wake up and fall asleep crying with a bottle in my hand. I was trapped. So even the bad days in recovery were nothing in comparison. And through recovery, I learned that there are so many people who are just like me, which I know it maybe at this point, this far in, it shouldn't surprise me, but it does in a way that's just, I think it's such a beautiful thing that there are so many people who identify with a story that I'm sharing, and I identify with so many of their stories. We are truly a group of people that maybe wouldn't hang out, but we know so much about each other because we share that lived experience. I didn't feel like I was a freak or an outcast, or all of these are words that I heard as I was growing up, and also things that I said to myself when I woke up and looked in the mirror. I was released of that, and it certainly started to get better as each passing moment. I started to live for that moment in that very second every day, because I knew that if I didn't stay present, I would start worrying about tomorrow or regretting yesterday. And you know, when I did clear my mind of the actual substance, I started to address my mental health diagnoses, and started to understand that a lot of where this came from was probably coming a little bit from when I was a child. And I've slowly been able to unpack that. I would certainly say my first year of recovery was just on gaining footing. I sort of look at it almost like a newborn. You know, there's a sort of natural growth that happens with a newborn. A lot of times newborns crawl and then eventually figure out walking, and a lot of times that's within a year, and that's almost about what can happen. And so for me, it really did feel like that when I started to identify where I was at in my recovery, to that of being a newborn, and even further as I've gone along. When I look at it like that, I'm able to give myself a little bit of grace, because I might still say the wrong thing, and The difference today is that I will say it and actually be able to immediately, if not very shortly after, apologize for it and do my best to hold myself accountable and try to make it right. I can't make everyone happy, which is such a relief to know that I'm not responsible for anyone else's feelings, but I am responsible for my actions. Um, the year after, gaining my footing, it was about clearing my mind. Eventually it started to work into the emotional elements, and most recently I've been working more on the physical part of my recovery. What do I consume on a day-to-day basis, nutrition wise? How do I treat my body? And through that, I'm learning so much about myself and these are all self-esteem issues that stemmed from when I was younger, that I'm just every day a shackle is being released, consistently. And there are even things there that I didn't realize were there. They were buried so far into, trauma from when I was younger, or even little moments that I didn't remember on the surface happening when I would be, out drinking. And it seriously surprises me. It shocks me all the time, the little things that happen. And I'll share a little bit of a story, and then go on to what we do as an agency. But something really cool that happened a couple of days ago. I was getting new tags for my car, and I had it in my mind that I wanted to get the honeybee. There's a Tennessee tag that's a honeybee, and it's Save the Bees. And I love plants and flowers and anything to do with nature, which is something I totally refused as a child. And now, as I'm getting a little bit older, I'm falling in love with it more and more every day. And when I got up to the county clerk's office, they didn't have that one. And so then I asked for the Art is a Rainbow, because I'm still able to perform today. I wanted to support the arts. They didn't have that one. And then I asked for one other that they didn't have. And eventually, just at complete random, I chose there's an Elvis Presley one. And I didn't pay attention. All of those license plates donate to some foundation. And I didn't know what the Elvis Presley one was. But I did know, sort of surface level, that my grandfather loved Elvis Presley, and my love for music and performing and singing absolutely comes from what he taught me growing up. So I got that one. I got in the car and I looked down, and it said that it donates to a specific hospital here, a trauma hospital here in town. And this rush, I couldn't stop the tears from flowing. And it wasn't sad tears, but this particular trauma center was the very last place that I was taken by ambulance to detox for alcohol poisoning. And so it's things like that pop up that just really mesmerize me about recovery, because I did not choose that tag. I very intentionally tried to choose another one. That license plate chose me. And I get to see opportunities like that happen. The relationships that I have in the theater community are so strong now. This is a community of people that I never thought would take me back in, and they have welcomed me with open arms. It certainly has not been easy. I've had to work for it, and I'm grateful that they allowed me the opportunity to work for it and didn't just give it back to me. I've earned it. I get to take up space in those rooms. I'm presently assistant directing for the first time in my life, and I never thought that would happen. And these are people who, again, watched me go through complete chaos. These are people that I burned bridges with, and they've just opened up their heart and their mind to me again. And that truly comes from being able to stand on my legs and to be an honest person who tries to do the right thing every day. And I am by no stretch of the imagination perfect, and I certainly hope I never reach that point. I need to remain a student, and I need to be there every single day. So there's so many gifts. The recovery, I'm able to be a son and an uncle and a dog dad. I have a dog and I love him so much. He's a rescue, but he rescued me. I can be a partner who is truthful. I pay my bills. These are all things that, just shy of a decade ago, I really certainly never thought would happen. These are things that I just felt like were totally out of reach. And It comes from me waking up every morning. And this is really my routine. I wake up every single morning and I just say, thank you for my life always, out loud. And I say that out loud as I'm going to sleep. At this point, my dog, who sleeps next to me, he's expecting it to happen because he looks back at me every time. And it's such a special thing to be able to do that every day. It's a special thing to wake up and plant my feet on the ground and walk and share my experience, strength, and hope, and learn from people who have similar shared lived experiences. Recovery is not possible, not always possible, without everyone around us. And it helps me so much to know that it's not an impossibility every day. A lot of times, and there are people who will sometimes come around and say, oh, okay, you've changed. And, I love that they bring that to me, because in a way, Bruce, circa 5 years ago might have taken offense to that, but now I'm just like, that's so incredible that you see that I am really truly working hard, because I am. I often tell people that I no longer lived in fear. I sold the whole building. And when I look back on my past, I smile and I just say thank you. And that's kind of where I'm at right now with my recovery. Just surrendered and eternally grateful. My work as a CPRS, wow, I just really just applied through a job website. It was a one-click apply. I certainly did not know that this field existed. I did not know that I could be surrounded by recovery all day long and live a sustainable life. I knew that there were things that I needed to do outside of work, and I certainly still do those things, but I didn't know that I could be here in this all day long and make a difference. Because most of my work up to that point was volunteer. So I walked into TMHCA, I had zero expectations, because again, I didn't even really know what I was walking into, and I was hired on the spot. Through further conversations, I found that there were several applicants, and I just was randomly picked because I was the first one that had applied. And again, that was sort of a wink to my recovery. This field really chose me, like that license plate did. And I remember my first day, I had facilitated groups that were groups that you couldn't crosstalk in. So it was mainly just listening. And peer recovery is a lot of listening, but I had never facilitated a group where folks had been communicating with each other and where we could have an open conversation. And from day one, from meeting our members, I really felt like I had known them my whole life. There was this instantaneous connection. And I've been here since July of 2019. So in a couple of weeks, I will be celebrating 3 years with TMHCA. And for me, holding a job for 6 months was a huge deal. I cannot believe that I've had an opportunity to be in one place for 3 years. I am, again, this is a recovery wink, and my mind is just blown away by this opportunity. At TMHCA, we offer several different programs. We really are kind of like a continuum of recovery. The program that I work in is called the Peer Link program. And sort of the purpose behind our program is it's an opportunity for peers to get together that have reached a place of stability, and they're ready to learn some things about life. They're ready to add things to their toolbox, coping skills or independent living, some health and wellness, recovery education, just overall knowledge. And they set their own goals. We do a lot of person-centered planning, which has become one of my new favorite things ever, because we get to watch people grow and we get to watch people come to their own conclusions. And I don't sit and give advice. I'm a connector. I don't do for. And it's a truly magical thing to be a part of, because these members come in and they decide, the things that are right for them. They are the expert on themselves. And hopefully, once they've reached their goals within our PeerLink program, they're able to move on and go and figure out what it is that they want to do within their own community to be contributing members of society, if that is their goal at the time. We also have a peer intensive care specialist program, and this specific program I think is really neat because the staff meet members when they are in crisis or just coming out of a crisis. And I really think it takes a very special person to be able to work through that with somebody. And what the peer intensive care specialists do is they take them through a 90-day aftercare program, let them get on their feet, and then hopefully connect them in some ways to their community so that they can also be contributing members of society. And oftentimes we do have members from the peer intensive care specialist program come in to the PeerLink program and continue their recovery. And I think one of the most rewarding things ever is to see someone go from day one, work through that 90-day aftercare program, and then come to the PeerLink program for about 6 months, and then come back a couple of months later and say, yeah, I've been working, I've got my own place. I've been sober, or I've worked on my recovery, or I've been to this many therapy appointments. It is so amazing to watch that growth, because seeing someone physically from day one to where they're at that point, it's like night and day. And they're so proud of who they are. And again, I wouldn't trade that for anything in the world. We also have an advocacy program, and this I feel like is so vital to have. We have advocates throughout the state, and what they do is they connect members with any kind of legal assistance, housing. They can help them research some clothing options or shelters, or case management if necessary. And I think that's such a special thing to have at TMHCA, because to know that someone is there individually working with you to help support you, that is amazing. We also have an education department that trains peers throughout the state on programs like RAP and Bridges. And there are some other programs, there are some other trainings that we're going to be implementing here coming up soon. And it's very exciting news for us. And it's a really great program as well. We have an individualized placement and support program, which is, or IPS, it's a job placement program. So these staff take members, into the community and help them prepare for a job interview and connect them with people that can meet their specific financial or the needs that they have, and help match them with jobs that are good with their skill set. So I think that's just incredible. They've just had a huge expansion in Maury County, and there's some bigger news coming up for them in the future that is really cool to see happening. So as an agency, we're growing and we're continuously expanding, because the need to help people just continues to get greater, which is why these connections and these alliances with NAMI and various other agencies are so important, because as I mentioned earlier, we truly are stronger together. And my experience working specifically with the LGBTQ plus community, it's ever evolving, and ever changing. I mean, I've worked with some recovery groups in town. I've built some connections where I feel like I'm establishing the most roots, and seeing something new happen is within our theater community. I have this opportunity to be a role model in the rooms, and I have had several people come up and ask me, what's working for you? What are you doing? And these are people that might be more on the side of recovery, that they're curious about getting into recovery, but aren't quite there yet, I guess, pre-contemplation. And I really just tell them that I'm living. I mean, that's pretty simply how I am with it. But there are several agencies within the Memphis area that are supportive of the LGBTQ plus community, and specific areas with like housing assistance, HIV wellness, job placement, youth and family assistance, and behavioral health, specifically tailored to the LGBTQ plus community. I will definitely email those links out, but those agencies are Out Memphis, Friends for Life, and there's another one called Friends of Georges. And I will send those links along with our TMHCA website to Kyle after this. And like I mentioned earlier, one of the most rewarding things is really just seeing people grow and working with them. And yesterday I was working with the members here at our Memphis site, and I told them, I said, y'all, I'm a little nervous. I'm presenting and I'm talking at this really amazing event, this collaboration we're doing with NAMI Memphis. And the first thing that they said was, okay, how can we help? What do you need? And that's amazing to me to hear that. And so I did ask them some questions. I gave them a couple of questions, and one of them was just what their thoughts on what mental health recovery was to them. And I also asked them to define hope in their own words. And with their permission, I did sort of combine a couple of them. One of the responses of what mental health recovery means to them is mental health recovery means you're back on your feet, you're stable, you're focused, you're energized. It means getting the help that you need, socializing with peers and talking out your misunderstandings, being there for others when they need someone to talk to or a shoulder to cry on. And then also encouraging myself and others to focus on our goals and dreams, even if others don't approve of them. That's the kind of stuff that I need to hear on a day-to-day basis, and that's truly from our membership. These are mental health consumers. They're coming here, they're just working on themselves, and to see them give those responses, it helps me so much too. And I just had to share that one with y'all. And the definition of hope, a combination of hope, was expecting things to improve and looking forward to better and greater things, wishing and believing in something at whatever cost, to keep a positive attitude, to live, to know that you're on the right track, that life is not passing you by and you are not alone. You have a great life ahead of you. And I just got chill bumps thinking about it, but it's so neat, the work that we get to do every day. And it's so important. And I just, again, want to say thank you to Kyle and to NAMI for this opportunity to share with you all. And I think Kyle wanted to open things up for a Q&A. So I'm absolutely interested to hear what y'all have to ask. And again, thank you so much.
So much for your story. And yeah, I mean, we have some folks in the chat talking about how inspiring your story has been, and it gives them hope as well in the work that they're doing, whether it's for their own recovery journey or for caring for another who's in their recovery journey. I think you've given us a lot to think about, and so we're really grateful. As I keep rambling here for the next couple of minutes while I'm waiting for some more questions to come into the chat, I just want to remind y'all, if you are on the Zoom, please put your questions into the Q&A box. If you are joining us on Facebook, please put them into the comment box, and we'll try to address them as we have time. Bruce, the first question that came in that we'd like to address is the role of storytelling. And I mean, quite literally, your presentation today, we weren't trying to go through a PowerPoint, we weren't trying to share a bunch of data and statistics today. We wanted you to share your story and talk about, what it means to be a peer in recovery, doing that as a volunteer professionally. Could you talk a little bit more about the role of storytelling in supporting those in mental health recovery, whether it's things you learned as a CPRS or other things that you yourself, when you were beginning your recovery journey? I'm thinking of, folks that are a little bit younger than yourself who don't know how to start. What's the importance of storytelling and all that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I would say the importance of storytelling and the key to it is it gives you, every time you tell a part of your story, it gives you the opportunity to become more authentically yourself, especially because when we're working with peers in recovery, I mean, the intent behind what we do in peer recovery is to connect with someone through a shared lived experience. So as long as we are 1000% speaking the language of the heart, because if we're not, the person we're talking to is going to know that. And of course, there's maybe no judgment on that end, but they're certainly going to know. We're working on building trust with someone and also building trust within ourselves. It's incredibly vital to tell your story. If you are someone who is just beginning your recovery journey and maybe you're not sure how to start, all that I can say is just make a beginning, start at the beginning. And sometimes for people, the beginning of their story where they can start telling it now ends up becoming the middle or the end of their story later. I work with our members very closely. I do a workshop with them about every 8 weeks of storytelling, and stories, just like books, they have a beginning, a middle, and an end. And we really just break it down. And the beginning is simply just the introduction, who you are, where you come from. It's what you enjoy, throw some things in there. Middle, that's going to be more of the bulk of the story. And then just sort of tying everything together and summarizing it is that's how I tell my stories. Of course, I grew up in theater and I've been a storyteller for 25 years. And I've been able to utilize those skills, but I would really just say make a beginning and tell the truth, speak the language of the heart, and it will not fail you.
Thank you so much, Bruce, for that answer. And yeah, I do have to say, your 25 years of storytelling experience, it was, thank you. It was beautiful to hear. Our next question has to do a little bit about, this series as a whole that NAMI is doing through the month of July for Bebe Campbell Minority Mental Health Awareness Month. And I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about how the role of identity is so important in your recovery journey, and what you would say to folks who are confused as to why we have to bring these things up. Why do we have to bring up gender identity? Why do we have to bring up communities of color or BIPOC? What is the role of that in the recovery journey, and sharing the matters of the heart, as you've been saying?
Great question, and great talking point. I probably could go on about this one for a long time. I think for a lot of us who are in who identify in a minority community, those that you mentioned, BIPOC or LGBTQ plus, or really just being in recovery in a lot of ways, and being and also in a lot of ways just being a human and liking the things that we like. There's a lot of stigma, there's a lot of shame, there's a lot of disagreement that surrounds being different. And really, when I say being different, I mean being unique, being yourself. And so a lot of times we conform to society because we feel like, well, if we walk a certain way and we talk a certain way, then people won't look at us differently. And that really applies across the board. It applies to gender identity, to the color of our skin, to our mental health diagnosis, or the fact that we're in recovery, or maybe that we like the color blue. It can really apply to all things. And I think ultimately, to kind of sum it up, it's because we all matter. And if we keep falling back and we choose not to talk about it because maybe it's a little bit easier, it won't get better as quickly, although I think it will still get better. And we don't necessarily have to know. I personally don't feel like we have to know who we are all the time. That's not a life goal or an intention that I necessarily have all the time. But it is important because there's someone else out there, even if it's one person, that identifies to a part of who you are. And that simple fact can save someone's life. It can really mean a matter of life and death. The stigma surrounding BIPOC and LGBTQ plus and mental health has cost a lot of lives. And unfortunately, in a lot of ways, it will continue to, unless we keep stepping up to the plate in big ways like we're doing now, and we find an identity or try to identify with someone else and start sharing our story. Because like I said, we all matter.
And, I think especially when we're talking about minority populations, the insinuation or the related idea is the idea of being statistically insignificant when it comes to a population. And what I would like to say to anyone who's listening who identifies in those ways is that your story is not insignificant. And so by sharing the story we shared today with Bruce or throughout the rest of this webinar series, I just want to know you to know that you're not alone. And we're really excited to bring this story throughout the rest of our presentations. And speaking of, as we near the end of our time, I just wanted to share a couple quick announcements for the rest of this webinar series, because we're not done with today's conversation. We have two more amazing presentations that NAMI Tennessee has queued up for Bebe Campbell Minority and Mental Health Awareness Month. So please save the date for next Wednesday, same time, 12 p.m. Central, 1 p.m. Eastern for all of y'all in Eastern Tennessee. We're going to be doing another Lunch and Learn webinar with Kevin Fisher, who is joining us from NAMI, Michigan, which is another state organization similar to NAMI Tennessee. It's amazing that this is happening on a nationwide level. Kevin's going to be talking about mental health crisis response with communities of color and minority populations. It's going to be a really great conversation. Kevin is the board of directors, or president of the board of directors for CIT International. If you're familiar with crisis intervention teams in Tennessee, you'll know about the amazing work that's being done by CIT teams across our state. And we're really looking forward to Kevin's presentation. Also save the date for Wednesday, July 27th. We are going to shift from a lunch and learn to an evening presentation at 6:30 p.m. Central Time. And that's going to be a panel discussion with NAMI Davidson County in Nashville, as well as some community partners, the Greater Nashville Chinese Association, as well as Asian Pacific Islander, Middle Tennessee are going to be talking about a community needs assessment that they launched in the Asian American community in Middle Tennessee. And so there will be some folks joining us from different departments, and we are just really excited for that presentation as well. And just to end, I just want to say thank you again to Bruce. Thank you to TMHCA for being a wonderful partner, to all the other partners that make this journey of recovery possible for so many across Tennessee. Like Bruce said, we're in this together. And so we really look forward to having you catch our other presentations this month. So thank you. And again, this is recorded, and we'll see you on Facebook and YouTube with those recordings. Take care, everyone.